My name is Kaiv Smith. I am 91 years old, and I am lying on my hallway floor. I am not panicking, I am not screaming, I am not calling anyone. I am just lying here, one eye back, looking up at the ceiling of a house I have lived in for 53 years. And I am thinking one thing. Is someone going to find me? Am I going to die here? I am thinking. My daughter finds out about this, she is going to take everything from me. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Kai, you fell. You're 91. You need help. The people who love you just want you to be safe. I know. I know that's what they want. And I want to tell you something that we have better a part of a year and three very specific failures to fully understand. Love can take the most from you. Not because they're cruel, not because they don't care, because they care so much, they stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a problem. And once you become a problem, everything they do, every conversation, every phone call, every well-meaning suggestion is designed to solve you. They don't see that maybe I'm fine just as I am. My name is Kaiv Smith. I am 91 years old. I buried my wife. I raised 3 children on a school teacher salary in a house that was always one broken furnace away from a very bad winter. I have been making my own decisions since before most of you were born. And the year I turned 90, my family sat down at my kitchen table and handed me a list. 3 options, all of them chosen with love, all of them wrong. This is the story of what happened when I said we did it to all 4. And what I found, standing in a mailbox on a gray Tuesday afternoon, at nobody planned, nobody predicted, and nobody could have put on a list. Stay with me.
I know you're busy. I know there are 100 other things you could be watching right now. But if you have ever watched someone you love start to disappear, not from death, but from being managed, or if you are the one who feels the walls getting closer, then what I'm about to tell you is going to matter. My family had 3 plans for me. I refused all of them. Let me tell you who this man was. Not the old man version they were trying to manage, the real man. Kaiv Smith had been a lot of things in 91 years. A son, a soldier, Korea 1952, which he didn't talk about much, but which you could sometimes see in the way he went quiet when a car backfired. A husband for 44 years to a woman named Eleanor. A father of 3, a widower for 4 years and 3 months by the time this story begins. He lived alone in the same house he'd owned since 1971, a house he knew the way you know your own hands. Every creak, every draft, every place where the light came through at the right angle on a Sunday afternoon. He cooked his own meals, paid his own bills, though he admitted online banking still felt like performing a magic trick he didn't fully understand. He walked to the end of the block and back every morning, slowly, but he walked. He called his grandkids on Sundays, he read, he watched his programs, he had his routines, his coffee at 5 a.m., his late dinner, 7:30, sometimes 8. Because that's when he and Eleanor always ate, and he saw no reason to change it just because she was gone. By any honest measure, this man was managing. But here's what nobody tells you about getting old in America. The people who love you stop seeing what you can do. They only see what might go wrong. And that November, gray November, trees already stripped bare. His daughter, Margaret, called. Dad, I think we need to talk. He said he knew, the way fathers always know. Margaret drove up that Saturday, and she brought her husband, David. Now, David was a good man, a decent man, but he visited Kaiv the way some people go to the dentist. Necessary, not unpleasant, but definitely not voluntary. He usually ran out of things to say to a 91-year-old man after about 40 minutes, and Kaiv respected him for not pretending otherwise. But David was here, on a Saturday, sitting at the kitchen table. And that told Kaiv everything he needed to know. This wasn't a visit. This was a meeting. Margaret had a notebook. She kept it slightly out of Kaiv's sightline, which he found both considerate and a little funny, because he was the one who taught her to be organized. She laid it out. 3 options. Option 1, come live with us. Option 2, we hire a caregiver, someone to come in during the week, help with the house, the shopping, the day-to-day. Option 3, and she said this one carefully, quietly, the way you say something you know might land hard. We could look at some communities, Dad, places with staff, other people your age, where you'd be safe. Safe. Kaiv looked at his daughter. She had his wife Eleanor's forehead. Always did, wide and honest. And he could see she was frightened. Not of him, for him. And that changed things. You can argue with someone who's wrong. It's much harder to argue with someone who's terrified on your behalf. So he said, all right, Margaret, let me think about it. He thought about it for 3 weeks. And then, because he had raised honest kids, and he owed them the same, he called her back. Let's try option 1. I'll come stay with you. Let's see how it goes. Margaret's house was warm, busy, full of life. The great-grandkids, little Oscar, 4 years old, used to climb into Kaiv's lap without asking, like it was just his right. Kaiv said he'd forgotten what that felt like, the specific, alive weight of a small kid who trusts you completely with their body. He hadn't had that in years. But here's what nobody tells you about moving into your kid's house when you're 90 years old. You become a guest. Not because they mean it that way, not because they're cruel, but because their life has a rhythm built around their schedule, their kids, their routines. And you're being fit into it like a piece of furniture that doesn't quite match, but everyone agrees to work around. Dinner was at 6. Not because Kaiv wanted 6. He'd never been a 6 o'clock dinner man. He and Eleanor always ate late, 7:30, sometimes 8. The news playing low in the background. But 6 was when the kids ate, and it was easier if everyone ate together. So he smiled, and he sat down at 6. And he was grateful. And he ate food that was fine and tasted like someone else's house. He woke at 5 a.m., the way he always had, and lay completely still in the dark of the guest room so he wouldn't wake anyone. The room smelled like lavender. Margaret put it in the linens. Lovely, objectively lovely, and not the smell of his house, not Eleanor's smell, which was gone now from everywhere, except sometimes. In the back of the old closet, he thought he caught something. But maybe that's just longing making things up. At 91, longing gets creative. And then one night, he was walking through the hallway, and he heard David's voice through the kitchen wall. Just a fragment. Something about the morning bathroom, the schedule, then Margaret's voice, lower, then silence. Kaiv stood in that hallway, and he understood. He had become a schedule problem. He went back to the guest room. He sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't cry. He was not a crying man. But he sat there for a long time with his hand on his knees, looking at the floor. You know, when you've been carrying something heavy for a very long time, and you finally have to admit that you've been carrying it in the wrong place? It felt like that. He called Margaret the next morning. Let's try option 2. The caregiver's name was Robert. He came through an agency. Brisk, professional, efficient, arrived at 8, left at 4. He was not unkind. He was exactly the kind of person you hire when you're trying to solve a problem. He cleaned Kaiv's kitchen so thoroughly that Kaiv couldn't find anything for 3 days. He made lunch that was nutritionally appropriate and entirely, without salt. The remote control was always somehow closer to Robert's side of the couch. And he called him Mr. Smith. After 44 years of being Kaiv, of being dad, of being grandpa, he was Mr. Smith, which Kaiv noted was what people called his father. Now, Robert wasn't a bad person, he wasn't. But here's what people don't understand when you send a stranger into an old man's kitchen. That kitchen is not just a room. That is the room where Kaiv coached his son through homework for 12 years, where he learned Eleanor's cancer diagnosis standing right there at the counter. The phone in his hand, the coffee going cold, where he and Eleanor danced, badly, slowly, the night their youngest graduated college, just the two of them, after the kids had gone home, because they didn't know what else to do with that much happiness. That kitchen is 40 years of his life pressed into the walls, and Robert's presence in it, however professional, however well-intentioned, felt like someone walking through a church during the service. Polite, but wrong. And then there was the money. Eleanor had left him comfortable, not wealthy. His pension was modest. The agency cost more per month than he expected. Margaret offered to cover the difference. He let her for 3 months. Then one evening, he sat down and he looked at the numbers. Really looked at them, the way he used to look at accounts in the lean years. Raising 3 kids on a teacher's salary. Lean years were most years. He thought, this is not sustainable, not without becoming a burden on my daughter. And Kaiv Smith had not been a burden on anyone in 91 years. He called Margaret, told her to cancel the agency. She cried. He said, Margaret, this isn't a tragedy. This is just thinking. She was quiet. Then, Dad, then what? What do you actually want to do? He said, let me think. Then she said something that changed the direction of everything. Dad, I need you to think about option 3. Just go look. Just look. They visited the community Margaret had found. It was a nice place, genuinely nice, bright colors, clean hallways, a common room with a piano that nobody was playing, a garden that was beautifully kept. The staff called him Buddy within 5 minutes. They showed him a room, single room, window looking over a courtyard, handrails in the bathroom, and on the wall, a whiteboard with the day's date and the schedule. That day, 9 a.m. Morning stretches, 10 a.m. Crafts, 12 p.m. Lunch, 2 p.m. A film, 4 p.m. Social hour. Kaiv stood in that room, and he thought, I have been making my own decisions since 1952. I shipped out to Korea at 19. I made life and death decisions before I was old enough to drink. I buried a wife. I raised 3 children. I built a life from nothing and kept it running for 7 decades. And now, a young man with a clipboard is going to tell me that at 2 p.m., I will watch a film. And at 4 p.m., I will socialize. I have never, not once, socialized on a schedule. He smiled. He said, looks wonderful. He asked polite questions. On the drive home, he looked out the window. And he thought, not yet. Not this. I am not ready to give up the last thing that makes me, me. Because here's what he understood that maybe the rest of us forget. At 91, after everything life takes from you, The wife, the strength, the steadiness in your hands. The friends who leave one by one until you're counting them on one hand and still have fingers left. The right to decide what you do at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That is not a luxury. That is the last essential thing. He told Margaret, not yet, and she went quiet. But somewhere underneath all that worry, she was relieved. Because she'd been listening to the fight in her father her whole life, and she would have been more scared if the fight had gone quiet. So here's where things stood. No daughter's house, no agency, no facility with a 2 o'clock film. Just Kaiv Smith, his big, quiet house, his green armchair, the one Eleanor always had clashed with everything, and a problem that had not, despite everyone's best efforts, been solved. And then, one afternoon, he went outside to get the mail. I know that sounds small, but some days, at 91, going outside to get the mail is an event. Standing at the mailbox next to his, the house next door, empty for 2 years, recently moved into, was a young woman. Wrestling with a stroller, a paper bag of groceries, and a toddler. Couldn't have been more than 18 months. Who had decided that this exact moment was the perfect time to sit down on the pavement and absolutely, completely refuse to move? She had the look. Kaiv knew that look. He'd seen Eleanor wear it for 15 years. The look of someone who's been holding everything together all day with one hand and just needs one more hand. He said, "Can I hold something?" She looked up like she'd forgotten other people existed. Then, "Yes, please." He held the grocery bag. She picked up the toddler. His name, he'd learned later, was Marcus. 18 months. Very strong opinions about pavement. She got the stroller open, got the groceries in, got the baby settled. Then she stood up, looked at Kaiv, and said, "I'm so sorry I'm a complete mess." And Kaiv said, "My name's Kaiv, and I'm the opposite of a mess, which, trust me, isn't always as good as it sounds." She laughed, the surprise kind, the kind that gets out before you can stop it. Her name was Layla, 29 years old, single mother, moved here for a job that vanished 4 months after she arrived. 2 kids, Marcus, the pavement philosopher, and a daughter, Priya, who was 7 and had her mother's eyes and her own very definite opinions about most things. No husband in the picture, no family nearby. And this was the part that got Kaiv. No one to call at 7 a.m. when Marcus had a fever and Priya needed to be at school. No one. Kaiv knew that shape. Not at 29. He had Eleanor by 29. But after Eleanor died, when the kids lived an hour away, when the phone felt like a prop in a play, when mornings were so quiet they made your back teeth ache. He knew that specific loneliness. He recognized it the way you recognize a language you once spoke. They started small. Layla would knock in the morning. "Could Marcus just stay an hour while I do the school drop-off?" Of course he could. Marcus was not a peaceful child. He had opinions about everything. What to eat, what to touch, what belonged where. Several of those opinions were physically dangerous. But he also used to press his whole face against the glass of Kaiv's cabinet, the one with Eleanor's china, the blue dishes he never used, and breathe on it, and stare at his own foggy reflection like it was the most extraordinary thing he'd ever seen. Kaiv found that unbearably lovable. And Priya, Layla's 7-year-old, started stopping by after school. "Just to say hello," she always said. She sat at the kitchen table doing homework while Kaiv made his late dinner. And she asked questions the way 7-year-olds ask, without filtering for what's appropriate. She asked why his hands shook. She asked if he'd been alive during a war. She asked, very seriously, if it was true that people used to have black and white vision. Kid had been looking at old photographs and drawn a perfectly logical, completely incorrect conclusion. And once, very quietly, she asked him, "Are you scared of dying?" And Kaiv thought about it, and then he said, "A little, but mostly I'm just real tired by 9 p.m. She laughed so hard she nearly fell off the chair. Layla checked on Kaiv, too, not the way Margaret did, not with the clipboard energy, not with worry pressing against every word. She just knocked. She brought food sometimes. Good food, occasionally alarming food. She went through a shakshuka phase that Kaiv had complicated feelings about. She sat in the kitchen and she talked. Real talk about her fears, the real ones, about money running out, about her mother far away and sick, about whether moving here had been a mistake and whether you could even know yet. And Kaiv told her things too, things he hadn't said to anyone in years, because the people he would have told were mostly gone. He told her about Eleanor, the real Eleanor, not the cleaned-up version from the funeral. The complicated woman, brilliant, stubborn, sometimes infuriating, who loved him in ways that were imperfect and absolutely, utterly real. He told her about leaving Eleanor's coffee cup on the counter every morning after she died because he wasn't ready to put it away. He told her about his old friend Ray Decker, funniest man he'd ever known, who died of a heart attack at 77 in the middle of telling a joke, which was, Kaiv always said, exactly how Ray would have wanted it. He hadn't told that story in years, because nobody who remembered Ray was left to tell it to. Layla didn't know Ray, but she listened, and that was enough. That was more than enough. That was exactly what he'd been missing. By spring, Kaiv washed Marcus 2 mornings a week so Layla could go to interviews. Layla did the grocery runs Kaiv's body wouldn't let him do alone anymore. She changed a light bulb he'd been leaving dark for 6 weeks because the step stool and his needs were no longer on speaking terms. He killed her basil plants 3 times in a row, and then grew her a new one from his own. He was proud of that. Margaret visited that April. Saturday afternoon, Layla knocked with Marcus on her hip, and somehow it turned into Layla and Margaret at the kitchen table talking about some show they'd both been watching, while Marcus tried to fit a wooden spoon into his mouth, and Priya sat in the corner with her legs over the arm of the chair, the way kids sit when they're comfortable somewhere. And Kaiv made coffee. Sunday morning, before Margaret left, she went quiet. She looked at her father, and she said, "Dad, you seem—" She stopped. He waited. "You seem like yourself." He didn't know what to say to that. He hadn't known he'd stopped seeming like himself. But somewhere in those months, in the business of being useful, of being needed, of telling the truth and being listened to in return, he had come back to something. Not the man he was at 40. You can't go back, and he didn't want to. There's too much you know at 91 that you didn't know at 40. But the man he'd always been at his most himself. Stubborn, direct, particular about his coffee. Willing to kill the basil 3 times before he finally got it right. That man, he was still there. Kaiv Smith is 91 years old. He still lives alone. He still has hard days. He knows how the story ends. He's been on this earth long enough to know exactly how stories end. But he said something to me that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. He said, "Fear is not the thing that decides whether you live well. What decides it is whether you choose every single day to reach across the space between yourself and another person and offer whatever you still have left to give." He couldn't give his daughter a father who needed nothing. He couldn't give the agency a man who wanted to be managed. He couldn't give that facility a resident who'd hand over his 2 p.m. without a fight. But he could hold a paper bag. He could watch a toddler breathe on cabinet glass and find it extraordinary. He could sit across a kitchen table and tell the truth and listen to the truth in return. And he found that 2 people struggling in different directions together were lighter than one. Marcus is 3 now. Last week, without anyone asking, he walked up to his mother and told her that Kaiv was his best friend. And Kaiv had to walk into the kitchen and pretend he was looking for something, so Layla wouldn't see his face. Don't go somewhere to be taken care of before you've tried something else, before you've knocked on a door, before you've held a paper bag, before you've sat across from someone struggling in a completely different direction and found out that together you're both a little less alone. I'm not telling you it fixes everything, but Kaiv is still in his house, in his armchair, with his late dinners, and Priya's footsteps on the porch every afternoon, and Eleanor's blue dishes behind the glass where they belong. That's enough. That is. He finally understood. Exactly enough. If this story sat with you, send it to someone who needs it, not to fix them, not to tell them what to do, just to say, "I was thinking about you." That's what Kaiv would do. I'll see you in the next one.